Today we have two stories of strange eyes flashing in the night, of curious shapes scuttling just beyond the glow of your headlights, and of lingering terror that soaks into the very ground beneath your feet. Brace yourselves, because when the sun goes down, the real Texas takes over, restless, mysterious, and prowling in the moonlight. Step into the abyss, and welcome to Weird Encounters. A place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and join our ever-growing community of the curious. Your support is the lifeblood that keeps this channel alive. Now, prepare yourself, for what you're about to witness is not for the faint of heart. I live about 30 minutes outside Denton, Texas. Let me say that Denton has never been known to me as some kind of supernatural hotspot, at least not in the way folks talk about places like Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Still, I've heard about the infamous Old Alton Bridge, locally called Goatman's Bridge by some, and the stories that swirl around it like dust devils on a hot day. You know, the typical local lore, sightings of a goat-like entity, strange lights, chanting in the woods at odd hours. We used to laugh about it in high school. I've hiked the nearby trails with friends, but I'd never seen or felt anything beyond normal, if not a bit creepy, older bridge vibes. Anyway, about 2 weeks ago, it must have been a Wednesday night, I was driving back from a late dinner with my cousin who was visiting from Houston. She's a city girl, not exactly the type to buy into small-town ghost stories. I normally take the main roads, but traffic was jammed up near the university for some reason. I think there was a concert going on or something at UNT, so I got the bright idea to detour. The GPS basically routed me down some smaller back roads, and before I knew it, I was coming up on Old Alton Bridge. This was close to 10:30 or 11 at night. My cousin was halfway dozing in the passenger seat, so I decided to slow down so she wouldn't freak out if the old rickety wooden beams made a noise. I was also kind of curious, I guess. The air was heavy, almost swampy, which is a bit strange for November. The temperature drop had come in earlier that week, but that night felt oddly warm. It's the kind of warmth that clings to you, sticky, and I remember rolling down the window a crack just to air out the car. That's when I noticed it. A smell like rotting vegetation mixed with something metallic. I told myself it was probably stagnant creek water, but I'd driven this area before and never noticed anything so pungent. My cousin wrinkled her nose in her sleep and shifted in her seat. I kept creeping forward, my headlights illuminating the old wooden structure in front of me. At that moment, my phone buzzed. A text from my neighbor, Pete. He's an older guy who used to work for the county roads department, mostly evening shifts. He told me I should be careful on the back roads because he'd heard from some local fishermen that there were weird sightings around the bridge again. Lights under the water, and even the suggestion of someone or something rummaging near the riverbank. Pete has always been full of stories, especially about local conspiracies. He once told me about a rumored government facility out by Lake Ray Roberts that was supposedly investigating unexplainable phenomena. I always took it with a grain of salt. Still, as soon as I read Pete's text, I swear something shifted in the darkness. It was a quick movement in my peripheral vision, off to the right under the bridge structure, somewhere along the creek bed. My cousin stirred, so I shut off the radio to see if I could hear anything unusual. Nothing at first, just the wind rustling through the trees. But then it was there, a low scraping sound, like heavy claws or nails dragging across damp gravel. I know how this must sound, but I'm telling you, every hair on my arm stood up. My cousin asked why we stopped. I didn't want to scare her, so I told her I thought I saw a deer on the side of the road. She's an animal lover, so she craned her neck to look around. That's when the scraping sound happened again, this time louder, more forceful. It reminded me of how an animal might paw at the ground, except it had an almost rhythmic pattern, like it was deliberate. In that moment, I glanced at the base of the bridge, right where one of the old stone supports stands. My headlights caught a glimpse of something large, hunched, and I guess almost pale in color, like it was wet or covered in a thin whitish membrane. It jerked away so quickly that I barely had time to register any detail beyond its extremely long limbs. My cousin gasped. She told me to drive, get out of there, but for some foolish reason I inched forward instead. The stench grew worse, like rotting fish carcasses. I fumbled for the flashlight in my glove compartment. I keep one in there ever since my dad told me never to rely solely on car lights for roadside emergencies. As soon as I shone it toward the creek bed, whatever this thing was shifted slightly behind the stone support. I can't say if it was crouched or kneeling. I just remember the shine of eyes reflecting back at me, not in that typical green or red reflection you see with animals, but a dull yellowish glow that seemed to pulse in and out, almost like it was breathing with its eyes. For a bizarre split second, I wondered if it might be some huge species of cat or a coyote with mange, though that wouldn't explain the color or the shape. My cousin started calling my name, borderline hysterical. She'd spotted the eyes too, and kept asking if it was a person. It was definitely not shaped like a person. The limbs were too elongated, and the arms, if they were arms, seemed to bend at a strange angle. The flashlight beam picked up an odd reflection, maybe moisture on its skin, but it looked nearly translucent in certain patches, almost reptilian, but not quite. I was about to back up the car when a truck came up behind us. The high beams from that vehicle lit the area so brightly, everything was a sudden wash of white. I think that's why we got a better look. The creature, I hate calling it that, but I don't know what else to say, scuttled on all fours from behind the stone support to the underside of the bridge. Its movements were jerky, like it hadn't fully mastered its own limbs. The driver of the truck blared the horn, probably annoyed we were sitting still on a one-lane approach. I looked up in the rearview mirror to motion that we'd move. But when I looked back, the creature was gone. No splashes, no further noises, just an empty creek bed and an echo of that foul stench. I drove forward, crossing the bridge as fast as the old wooden planks would allow. My cousin was trembling, and I was trying to keep it together enough to get us home. The next day, I told Pete about it, and he just shook his head and said he wished he could say he was surprised, but he's heard a half-dozen stories like mine over the years, stories that never quite match any known animal. He claims it's some kind of crawler humanoid, something that's either from a different dimension or an experiment gone wrong, possibly covered up by some shady government group. Pete swears that some nights you can see unmarked SUVs parked just off those back roads, scanning the creek with infrared cameras. That weekend, my cousin refused to go anywhere near that area, so we stuck to the restaurants near downtown Denton. I caught myself flipping through local news archives, half hoping to find a rational explanation, half hoping to find someone else who'd gone public with a similar sighting. There wasn't much, except for a few vague references to unidentifiable animals in letters to the editor from the 1970s, and one paragraph in a local forum from about 3 years ago describing a strange figure crawling under the old Alton Bridge around midnight. No photos, no videos, just scattered descriptions about that foul smell, elongated limbs, and a gaze that could chill you to the bone. I keep running through it in my mind, trying to remember every detail. Part of me wonders if it might have followed us across the bridge that night, but I didn't see any sign of it afterward. Still, for the next few days I had the weirdest feeling of being watched whenever I was outside after dark. My dog, a big German shepherd named Titan, started acting skittish around the backyard fence. He'd pace and stare into the distance, letting out low growls at nothing I could see. My neighbor's security light flickered a few times at odd intervals, which might be just normal electrical issues, but in the context of everything else, it felt like part of the bigger puzzle. I don't know if what we experienced was connected to all those rumors swirling around the bridge. I don't want to jump to conclusions about government labs or interdimensional portals, but I do know something very real was there that night. Something that didn't look like it belonged in this world, at least not naturally. And whatever it was intelligent enough to hide as soon as we tried to get a better look. I have this gut feeling that chasing answers might lead to more questions than I'm prepared for. Still, I can't shake it, and I keep reading more about these cryptid sightings around Denton and Lake Ray Roberts. There's something happening out here, something we're not meant to see, or at least not supposed to talk about. My cousin is still a little traumatized, and she refuses to discuss it with anyone but me. Pete, on the other hand, keeps telling me I need to be careful where I poke my nose. He says people who go looking for these things often regret finding them, and honestly, he might be right. Anyway, that's the story, as best as I can recall it. Make of it what you will. I can't say I have any definitive proof, just the memory of those eyes and that scraping sound echoing in the heavy night air. It's enough to keep me wide awake, replaying that moment under the bridge over and over. A nighttime journey across an old bridge, a strange figure lurking in the shadows, and more questions than answers. Perhaps it's just a tale best left in the darkness. This next story might feel like just another night, but sometimes, out in those endless pines and oaks, certain shadows move in ways they shouldn't. You might wonder what that rustling could be, or if the pale flicker between the trees is just your imagination. I've got a story that's been burning in my mind ever since it happened last month, and I need to get it out there. Truth be told, I never thought I'd be one of those people writing to you with a weird story of my own. But I suppose none of us really expect it until it happens. This all took place up near the edge of the Sam Houston National Forest, northeast of Huntsville, Texas. I was out with my friend Ronnie and his older sister Melissa. It was a Saturday evening, early December. We'd decided we wanted to drive out past New Waverly into some of the lesser-known trails, looking to try our luck with some wildlife photography. Melissa's big into photography, especially at dusk when the lights got that golden glow. We had just enough time to reach a spot off FM 2693 before the sun completely set. We parked near a clearing that's commonly used by local hunters. That day was quieter than usual. No trucks, no ATVs. I don't remember hearing any gunshots in the distance like we sometimes do. It was still as if the woods were holding their breath. The only hint of activity came from a few crows spiraling overhead and that distant hum of the highway when the breeze shifted. I recall Ronnie telling us that his buddy, who hunts hogs out here, had mentioned something strange about this stretch of forest. He said the hog population had dropped off a cliff in recent weeks. Fewer sightings, torn up ground, or the usual signs of those animals. Ronnie's buddy joked that maybe there was a bigger predator around, something scaring them off. We laughed it off. But looking back, maybe it wasn't just a joke. We spent about 40 minutes taking photos of the scenery, the tree lines, and the early moon. Around that time, Melissa noticed a weird odor, sort of that wet dog smell, but sharper, and maybe with a slight acidic tang to it. Hard to describe. Ronnie shrugged it off, said the forest is full of weird odors if you know where to look, or maybe a raccoon had died nearby. I thought nothing of it, though it made my stomach flip a bit. We turned to head back to the car. figuring we'd come back tomorrow at sunrise if we wanted more shots. On the way, I started feeling uneasy, like we were being watched. I know that's a cliché, people say that all the time. But this felt different. My nerves were on edge for no clear reason. I swear I heard a branch snap behind us. Melissa spun around with her camera, hoping maybe it was a deer, but there was nothing, just the outline of trees, heavy with Spanish moss. Ronnie teased her about jumping at shadows, but I think he felt it too because he kept glancing back over his shoulder. When we got to the car, I realized I'd left my phone behind on a stump near where we'd taken some group photos. I decided to jog back, telling Ronnie and Melissa I'd be 2 minutes max. They stayed by the car, presumably packing up gear. Heading back alone wasn't my smartest move, but I figured it was no big deal. This was Texas woodland, after all, maybe some wild hogs or a stray coyote, but I wasn't worried. The air felt thicker among the trees. My ears picked up the sound of something moving, low to the ground, but I couldn't pinpoint where. Each step I took seemed to echo. The sun was basically gone by that point, so everything was tinted a deep purple blue. My flashlight cut a narrow path, and then I saw it on the ground, my phone, glowing faintly with a missed call from Melissa. I scooped it up, relieved. That's when my flashlight caught a glimpse of something behind a nearby trunk. I can't say I saw much detail at first, just a pale shape that vanished the moment light hit it. Instinctively, I swung the beam around, but it was gone. I tried telling myself it was just a reflection on the bark, maybe a bleached patch of tree fungus, but I remember the distinct impression that it had moved, like a quick jolt, pulling away. I felt that wave of unease surge up again, stronger this time. I turned to head back to the car. I only got a few steps before hearing the rustling again, this time more deliberate. Twigs snapped. Something was behind me, keeping pace. I whipped around with the flashlight, and that's when I saw it clearly, this pale, wolf-like creature, hunched over at first, but it shifted its weight onto 2 legs. It reminded me of a half-starved canine, yet tall, taller than me by a good half-foot. The fur was sparse, almost patchy, more like a thin covering of dull white or gray. And the eyes. The reflection came back as a faint, sickly yellow, not that bright eyeshine you see in normal dogs or wolves. My mind was racing, telling me there's no way this is real. It didn't snarl exactly, but I could hear a low rumbling sound, a kind of guttural vibration that made my teeth ache. The front limbs were elongated, almost like arms, with clawed hands, if I can even call them hands, that rested near its chest when it stood upright. It was like a twisted caricature of a wolf that learned to walk like a human. In that split second, I was too stunned to move. Finally, my body caught up with my brain, and I started backing away. I didn't dare turn my back on it. I remember I muttered something under my breath, almost like a plea, not even sure to who. The creature cocked its head to one side, as if it was studying me, and then it took a step. And that's when I took off running, darting the flashlight around just enough to make sure I wouldn't slam into a tree. By the time I burst out of the thicker brush into the clearing, I was drenched in sweat. Ronnie and Melissa looked startled. Ronnie said he'd heard me crashing through the undergrowth like a madman. Melissa asked if I was okay, said she tried calling my phone again. I told them something was back there, something not natural, and I pointed my flashlight, half expecting to see it charging after me. But all we saw were shifting shadows beneath the pines. We jumped in the car and locked the doors. Ronnie took the wheel and sped out of there. I could hardly catch my breath. Once we were on the main road, I tried to piece together what I'd seen. Some kind of cryptid canine, or dogman, if that's the term people use. It was definitely nothing like I've seen before, and I've spent a good amount of time outdoors. We debated calling the park rangers or even the sheriff's department, but honestly, who would believe us? I still can't believe it myself. A few days later, I mentioned it quietly to another friend who hunts in that area. He told me he's heard whispered stories of wolf people sightings around those parts for decades, especially near water sources in the forest. He said there's an old rumor about the government once collecting samples of some mutated canine in the 1970s, but it was never confirmed, just scraps of info from old-timers around town. I've never been big on conspiracy theories, but after what I saw, I'm open to anything. Melissa couldn't sleep for days. She told me she keeps seeing that pale shape whenever she closes her eyes. Ronnie won't admit it openly, but he's been more jumpy than usual. He keeps the porch lights on all night now. As for me, every time I replay the memory, I get that pit in my stomach. I start to wonder, if it could walk on two legs, does that mean it can pry open doors? Does it roam near the houses on the outskirts of the forest? Could it sneak into someone's yard in the middle of the night? The weirdest part is, I keep questioning if I should have taken a photo, but there was no time, no coherent thought in my head beyond get out. That feeling of being studied like an insect under a magnifying glass hasn't left me since. It's almost as if it was letting me see it on purpose, like a warning. I haven't ventured back to that stretch of the forest, and honestly, I'm not sure when or if I ever will. I'm no expert, but I know what I saw was real. If anyone else has seen something similar in the Sam Houston National Forest or anywhere nearby, I hope they'll come forward. Maybe there's a pattern or some local lore that can shed light on all of this. Until then, I'd advise caution if you decide to wander too far off the beaten paths out here. You never quite know what's watching from the tree line. And there you have it. Another unsettling glimpse into the moonlit corners of the world where normalcy slips through the cracks and something else emerges. A pale, wolf-like figure stalking the Texas pines, an image not easily dismissed. One can only wonder what other secrets the forest holds, waiting just beyond the reach of our headlights. Picture, if you will, a world where strange lights glide across desert skies and chain-link fences guard not only our borders, but our biggest secrets. Two distinct voices reached out, each bearing witness to nightmares that lurk in the shadows of government bases, mutated beings, advanced mind control experiments, clandestine operations rumored to surpass our wildest imaginations. Join us as we step into that twilight realm. The fantastical might just become real. I'm telling this story with a lump in my throat, trying to put into words the impossible things I've seen and heard. My heart's still pounding from a story I heard recently about an incident at the Tonopah test range in Nevada. There's talk of new aircraft being test-flown, which isn't weird in itself. But Reed said these aren't normal craft. He swears he's seen them move in ways that defy logic. Vertical ascents in the blink of an eye, abrupt stops mid-air, no visible propulsion. Then there were the rumors from the base canteen about certain volunteers being brought in, people who apparently can control these contraptions without so much as flipping a switch purely by thought. He doesn't know if they're military personnel or test subjects, but he swears they're human only in the loosest sense of the word. He's convinced something big's being prepared, that they're testing these mutated pilots for an event the rest of us haven't been warned about. Now, if it was just Reed telling tall tales, maybe I'd brush it off. But then I came across an old acquaintance, Francis, who worked at the infamous Dugway Proving Ground in Utah a decade back. He said that talk of mind-controlled flight systems had been swirling for years. The difference now is the level of secrecy has ramped up. Even he's noticed it from the outside. Security contractors with no identifiable badges, convoys with tinted windows rolling in at odd hours, and local ranchers in the area telling each other about men in black gear prowling around after midnight. One rancher, a neighbor to Francis, said he saw what he described as people, but not really people, stepping out of one of those unmarked trucks. He only caught a glimpse from behind a row of cedar trees, but he described them as extremely pale, with elongated limbs, wearing something like streamlined helmets. But he said he's pretty sure the helmets were more like implants. He saw no straps, no clasps. It was like the metal was fused into their skulls. He got so freaked out, he took off before he could see more, and he's been shaken up ever since, and it doesn't stop there. I remember back in 2019, I was driving through New Mexico, down near the Archuleta Mesa, outside Dulce. That's the place people always say houses an underground facility, a facility rumored to be a collaborative project between black-budget government groups and who knows what else. At the time, I wasn't looking for trouble, just passing through. But I overheard a conversation in a small diner. The locals talked about strange lights under the mesa, some silent craft emerging at night, even sightings of half-human creatures wandering the desert. They said these people had large, dark eyes and something about them felt off, like they could sense your thoughts. Fast forward to last week when I stumbled onto a YouTube channel, small, obscure, basically no subscribers, featuring a shaky video that apparently captured an escapee from an underground structure near that area. The figure in the video was hunched, hairless, and moving in a way that reminded me of an ape with a twisted posture, except it moved with a strange grace, like it anticipated every footstep before it landed. The clip didn't stay up long. It got pulled within hours. But I watched it enough times to notice something, metal plating on its arms, or at least something metallic glinting under the desert moon. My guess is it was some kind of implant, reminiscent of what that rancher said about fused helmets. These pieces of the puzzle started to align for me. Reed's talk about mind-controlled aircraft, Francis's friend seeing pale, augmented individuals, the rumors around Dulce that they're melding human physiology with something else, maybe alien, maybe artificially generated DNA, who knows? That's when it hit me. They're not just prepping experimental tech, they're building an army of test subjects capable of operating that tech with their minds. I don't know if you've seen the recent headlines from the last few days about the so-called training exercises near the Nevada Test and Training Range. There was an odd mention of electromagnetic pulses being tested for defensive applications. But people in the know keep hinting that it's more than just a non-lethal weapon. They're forging a bond between technology and biology, teaching these mutated soldiers to manipulate electromagnetic fields with their brains. 2 nights ago, I came across a guy named Arturo at a truck stop outside Alamo, Nevada. He was visibly shaken, said he was hauling freight near Creech Air Force Base when he saw an entire convoy of trucks heading toward Nellis Air Force Base, accompanied by black helicopters overhead. No lights, no markings. Arturo heard from his dispatcher that some super-secret cargo was being moved, possibly to be flown out to Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. Some believe it's new drone prototypes, but now I can't help wondering if it's these genetically altered operators. It keeps me up at night, listeners, wondering what the end game is. Are they preparing for an interstellar conflict, a mass-scale terror event, or maybe the powers that be just want the ultimate control? Troops who can pilot advanced weaponry using sheer thought, free from the limitations of standard training. If that doesn't send shivers down your spine, I don't know what will. I keep thinking about a rumor I heard a year ago from a friend who used to train with a special operations unit at Fort Bragg. He claimed that certain recruits disappeared, individuals with top scores in fields like intelligence, marksmanship, even language comprehension. No official statement, just orders that they were transferred. Those who asked too many questions got assigned to less desirable posts or quietly mustered out. Now, with everything else swirling around, I suspect those recruits might have been funneled straight into these clandestine programs. The biggest bombshell I have is from a person I'll call Casey, a whistleblower of sorts who reached out to me anonymously. Casey said she worked with a biotech firm that received a series of million-dollar contracts from the Department of Defense. The deliverables weren't new vaccines or treatments for soldiers. They were neural implants designed to boost telepathic potential, or so the official wording read. She claims they tested them on volunteers under the notion of improving reaction times, but the real experiments delved into telekinesis, mind control, and yes, you guessed it, controlling vehicles remotely, even advanced aircraft. Casey suggested that somewhere in an underground lab at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, there's a group of subjects who've passed every test with flying colors, able to move small objects with directed concentration, even cause certain electronics to short-circuit by focusing on them. She also indicated that these subjects are far from normal mentally, many on the brink of psychosis from the strain of their new abilities. But it doesn't appear the program cares about their well-being, only about results. And if there's any truth to that, then we're dealing with an operation that's more sinister and advanced than any of us dared to imagine. At this point, I'm questioning everything. Are those rumored alien alliances real? Have they managed to reverse engineer some otherworldly tech so effectively that they're now splicing it into our own soldiers? Or is this strictly a homegrown nightmare, courtesy of black budget money and unscrupulous science? One thing's for sure. They're gearing up for something monumental. Military presence in these secretive hotspots is skyrocketing, and every local I've spoken to feels the tension building. We might be standing on the threshold of a new kind of warfare, one where men and machines merge into something unrecognizable, unstoppable. I can't shake the feeling that when the veil finally lifts, it'll be too late. The question isn't whether they have the means to deploy these mutated mind-controlling operatives. It's when they'll decide the time is right. Remember that what's hidden beneath these bases could change our world overnight. So, we're left wondering, what exactly is the government preparing for? And more importantly, will we recognize ourselves once it arrives? This next story also unveils dark secrets kept under the lock and key of clandestine bases hidden out in the desert. A handful of curious souls, each one with a story to tell and haunted by the unthinkable. The recent news about a so-called anomaly near Dugway Proving Ground in Utah nearly made me choke on my coffee. They always try to explain it away. Some official gave a statement about routine testing, some crazy flare test, or maybe something about advanced drone trials. You might have seen that short clip on a local Salt Lake City station. Didn't last on air for more than a minute or so before it got yanked off the rotation, and that's the problem. The moment we get close to the real reason behind those nightly booms or weird streaks of light in the sky, something or someone steps in to tell us we're overreacting. I've spent time out near Dugway on camping trips with my friend Will. He's ex-Air Force, not a talkative guy, but after a few beers, you can't shut him up. He told me about a hush-hush project he overheard the brass discussing, something that apparently dwarfs even the stuff rumored to go on at Area 51 in Nevada. He's convinced that deep beneath the main compound, they're working on some cutting-edge biological weapons, but not in the typical sense. Will insists it's bigger than viruses or chemicals. It's about human experimentation, merging certain physical traits from things that, if you believe him, aren't quite human at all. I know that sounds nuts, but then I met Sarah, a friend of Will's cousin, who swears she once worked with a private contractor. She was just an office assistant, didn't see anything firsthand, but claims a whistleblower from within told her that these government labs had discovered something akin to reptilian DNA strands. And yes, I'm well aware how that makes me sound. But she said they have a row of labs out there, separate from the standard testing zones, hidden behind thick walls with no windows. She saw men escorted inside wearing those plastic hooded suits, coming out hours later looking absolutely shell-shocked. According to Sarah, people occasionally disappear around that area, not on paper, not with any big announcements, just folks with the wrong security clearance or who started asking too many questions. She said the whistleblower confided that entire families were relocated or reassigned to keep them quiet. And that's not the first time I've heard about families going missing. I mean, just last year, a couple from Toole County vanished right after they posted footage of bright lights near the base's perimeter on their personal YouTube channel. Some wrote them off as attention seekers, but I got to see the original footage from a friend in law enforcement, and let me tell you, something about those lights looked almost alive, like flickering orbs that moved way too fast for any drone or helicopter. Then poof, this couple was gone, never heard from them again. And it's not just around Dugway. I was in Rachel, Nevada once, near the famous Area 51. You'd think you've heard all the stories about UFOs and experimental aircraft. But the talk among locals there isn't just about flying craft. It's about things walking at night. Creatures with elongated limbs that some folks call crawlers, or pale ones. A group of hikers from Oregon told me they saw shadowy figures on the outskirts of the base, patrolling, except these figures weren't wearing uniforms. One described them as being almost skeletal, but with reflective, almost reptilian eyes. Another insisted they seemed to phase in and out of the darkness. That kind of phenomenon leaves you wondering if it's all connected somehow. Top-secret genetic testing and these cryptid creatures that appear in the desert at night. Then, as if I hadn't heard enough to spook me, earlier this week, the local news in Tonopah, Nevada, reported an incident near the Tonopah test range. A small group of animal researchers claimed they found an abnormally large canine corpse in the desert. Official channels said it was just a coyote, but get this. The guys who found it said it had some kind of unusual bony protrusions along its neck and back. They also noticed that the eyes had a strange black sheen to them. Didn't look remotely like any standard coyote eye. And before anyone could examine the body, base security rolled up and confiscated it, giving everyone the usual line about public safety concerns. Does it strike anyone else as odd that every time we get something that might blow this conspiracy wide open, it's snatched away under official authority? I've had enough second-hand accounts from local ranchers to know that something prowls the night in these desert regions. Something that can outrun an ATV, scale rocks like it's no problem, and vanish by daybreak. Folks talk about it with the same kind of fear you see in war veterans, that haunted look that says they saw something they can't unsee. And now, with the recent incident near Dugway, the pattern is crystal clear to me. There's a grand-scale operation going on here, whether it's to create advanced super soldiers or a new line of biological weapons, or maybe they're splicing DNA with something we only know from nightmares. Maybe they're trying to open portals to other dimensions, for all we can guess. I ran into an older man near a convenience store in Skull Valley who claimed he used to be a security guard at the periphery of the base. He said in an off-the-record way that he once saw strange crates being transported by unmarked black trucks, escorted by men in suits, not uniforms. The crates, he said, were vibrating, and he told me they made noises, like a growl or a low hum. He wasn't sure which. He also hinted that some of those crates were shipped out to other installations, Fort Hood in Texas, maybe even Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. If we trust him, these research projects aren't confined to one desert location. They're branching out, like a secret network with multiple nodes. The goal? No one seems to know, but all signs point to a mass-scale experiment, on us, on them, on whatever these cryptid or reptilian beings are. The scariest part, listeners, is the sense that we're only seeing the tip of this monstrous iceberg. That whistleblower told Sarah the time was coming when their research would be let loose in the real world. And maybe that time is nearly upon us. If you read between the lines, you might pick up on small news stories about unexplained disappearances or sightings of impossible creatures. And it's always blamed on the imagination or the environment or a tragic accident. But last night, I got a text from Will. "They're ramping up," he wrote. Something big is about to happen. Don't trust what you see on TV tomorrow. And here I am, the very next day, reading the news about anomalies at Dugway. Maybe Will's onto something. Maybe they're planning a final test, unleashing something that's been in the works for decades. It's terrifying to think about, but I'd rather share my suspicions and be called a fool than sit by and remain silent. I don't know how to wrap my head around all of this. The unexplained sightings, the top-secret government facilities, the bizarre creatures described by so many terrified eyewitnesses. It's too consistent to be coincidence. And my gut feeling, which I can't shake, is that we're barreling toward some horrifying reveal. We might wake up one morning and discover that those rumors of reptilian hybrids or interdimensional entities aren't just conspiracies on a fringe YouTube channel anymore. They could be walking among us. Or worse, they could be us, changed by the very folks we trusted to protect us. Let me leave you with this, listeners. Next time you see strange news vanish from your TV or website, ask yourself who's behind it. And if you're ever out near Dugway or Tonopah or Area 51 and hear unsettling noises in the night, don't wait around to see what's making them. There's a reason so few outsiders ever come forward with proof. It's because that proof tends to disappear, sometimes taking the eyewitness along for the ride. I'm sharing this now because I think our time is short. They can't keep a lid on this forever. When it breaks, when these experiments or cryptids or whatever they've been cooking up in those labs find their way into broad daylight, I hope we're ready. We're left with an unsettling question, aren't we? Just how far would certain powers go to shield the unthinkable from view? Desert nights, hidden labs, rumors of reptilian hybrids lurking beneath the surface. A story that feels almost too outlandish to be real, until you stand in the same spot where the footprints fade into the sand. Two tales, each unfolding under California's vast skies, yet worlds apart in the horror they contain. The first leads us into the dark heart of Northern California's ancient redwoods, where something terrifying and primal stalks unwary wanderers through the towering trees. Then, far to the south, the relentless desert sun sets the stage for an encounter with a mutated clan of deformed predators who skulk among abandoned military roads. Both stories reveal secrets best left undisturbed, and both confront us with a single haunting truth. Sometimes, the shadows hold more than mere darkness. A couple of weeks ago, although it feels like months in my mind, my friend Carter and I decided to take a weekend trip through the Redwood National and State Parks in Northern California. We both needed a break from city stress, and we'd been fascinated for a long time by stories of strange happenings in the deep forests near the Klamath River. Little did we know that whatever was lurking among those colossal trees was far beyond anything we could have expected. I should mention first that we'd done our homework. We read up on local trail conditions and planned to hike through the popular sites at Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park, then maybe head down to Prairie Creek Redwoods if time allowed. We started hearing odd rumors from a woman at a small grocery in Orick when we stocked up on supplies. According to her, there'd been talk of missing hikers off-trail. People chalk it up to folks getting lost or local wildlife, but she mentioned seeing something unnatural lurking in the forest. She didn't want to elaborate. She merely told us to stick to the marked paths, especially at dusk. That's when I started feeling uneasy, but Carter brushed it off. On the first day, things went as planned. Spectacular views of those ancient trees towering overhead like silent giants. We set up camp at Mill Creek Campground that night. The place was quiet, no rustling of squirrels, birds, or anything else you'd expect in a typical forest environment at night. Even though the redwood groves often have that muffled kind of silence, this felt like everything had retreated into hiding. I mentioned it to Carter in a roundabout way, and he simply suggested we get an early start in the morning, maybe see some wildlife then. But that night, I had trouble sleeping. There was this subtle feeling, like something was pacing the perimeter of our campsite. No footsteps or twigs snapping, just more like the atmosphere itself was shifting, a sense of a presence. I recall drifting in and out, getting glimpses of faint silhouettes against the moonlight whenever I found the courage to peek out of my tent flap. At one point, I was sure I glimpsed a tall figure taller than any person I'd seen standing between two giant redwoods. It was so thin it almost blended with the trunk, but every time I blinked, it seemed gone. We woke at dawn, packed up, and pressed onward. The second day is when everything turned from a mild sense of unease into something truly nightmarish. We took a lesser-known path that branched off from the main trail toward an area known for its thick understory and rough terrain. It was around midday when Carter mentioned something was trailing us. He kept glancing back, saying there was an occasional rustle in the underbrush. Normally, I would have assumed it was a deer or maybe a stray elk, but the slight glimpses we caught, just fleeting shapes from the corner of an eye, seemed oddly humanoid. It felt like we were heading into territory that humans weren't meant to tread. The trees were so massive they blocked out the sun, and the deeper we went, the quieter it got. That in itself was bizarre. No distant bird calls, no scurrying chipmunks, just a heavy emptiness. We came upon a clearing near the Klamath River. The water rushed softly nearby. That's when everything escalated. We saw deep claw-like marks on a tree trunk, too high to be made by any normal creature. They were spaced in a way that suggested a hand or paw larger than our own by a good margin. A sense of dread pooled in my stomach, and I remember Carter muttering he'd never seen anything like that. Then we noticed an odd stench, almost like decaying flesh mixed with damp moss. It wafted in on the breeze, strong enough to make my eyes water. We both froze, scanning the edges of the clearing. That's when I saw it. The figure stood maybe 30 feet away, partially hidden behind the twisted remains of a fallen redwood. It was tall, probably over 7 feet, with elongated limbs and a hunched back. Its skin, if you could call it that, looked stretched tight over a gaunt frame, almost grayish, and it had these twisted antler-like protrusions on its head. That's when the word Wendigo popped into my mind, something we'd heard from local legends, but I always thought those were mainly stories from the North Woods and Great Lakes region. Yet this thing was right there, in front of us, in the redwood forest. We locked eyes, or rather, it fixed its eyes on us. They seemed sunken, but had this faint glow, like embers burning in a dying fire, but still enough to send chills through every part of me. It was as if it was staring straight into my core, reading my thoughts. Carter's breathing became ragged, and I realized I'd been holding mine. I felt a primal terror welling up, like the kind of fear that tells you you've wandered into the domain of a predator that sees you as prey. Without any overt movement, I felt it shift its attention from me to Carter, as though it was choosing which of us to approach first. And this was the most horrifying part. It slowly tilted its head, almost like it was curious or mocking us. Everything in me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. My legs were locked in place, adrenaline spiking so hard my heart thundered in my ears. Carter finally managed to break free from that paralysis and gestured for me to move back toward the path. As we started to inch away, the creature let out a sound that was unlike anything I'd ever heard, like a raspy exhalation crossed with a pained moan, if you can even imagine that. It hit me so hard I stumbled and nearly fell. Carter pulled me up and we bolted. We didn't see exactly which direction it moved, but I swear it was stalking us on a parallel course. Every so often we'd catch a glimpse of that horrifying shape weaving through the trunks, disappearing and reappearing. At one point, we found ourselves disoriented. No cell signal, no marked trail to rely on. We wandered for what felt like hours, with the dreadful certainty that we were being toyed with. Occasionally, we'd catch the stench again, the same rotting odor, alerting us that the creature might be just out of view. My mind jumped to all the stories we'd read about unexplainable vanishings and remains found scattered in remote areas. It was a living nightmare. Eventually, by sheer luck, we emerged onto a well-worn path near Boy Scout tree trail. We saw a couple of other hikers in the distance. They waved to us casually, but must have noticed our ashen faces and the terror in our eyes because they hurried over. Carter tried to explain something was chasing us, though he never used the word Wendigo. He just described a tall, antlered creature with a stench. The hikers looked concerned, but also confused. We stayed with them until we reached the trailhead parking area, not daring to look back. Even now, I keep replaying that stare in my mind. Those burning, hollow eyes, the feeling it projected. It was like raw hunger and ancient malevolence rolled into one. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a diseased elk or some other bizarre anomaly. But that doesn't explain the humanoid outline, the elongated limbs, that impossible sense of intelligence in its gaze. Carter and I are still shaken. We've told a few people, close friends mostly, and most just think we misidentified a known animal under stress or panic. But Carter swears, and I agree, that we both saw something that defies logical explanation, something that shouldn't exist in those ancient redwood groves, or anywhere for that matter. I'm sharing this now for your YouTube channel, because I believe folks should know that just because something seems tied to a certain region or is labeled as a myth, it doesn't mean it can't show up in unexpected places. We might never have the full story, but I can tell you this. Those deep, silent redwood forests hold more secrets than we'd like to believe. Take this for what it's worth. I can't force anyone to believe what Carter and I experienced, but I do hope you keep your eyes open if you ever find yourselves wandering off the beaten path in Northern California's ancient woods. Even the mightiest trees can't protect you from what lurks in their shadows. Tales of creatures beyond explanation have fueled our imaginations for centuries, and yet, sometimes, the imagination isn't so far from the truth. This next story takes place in the vast emptiness of the Mojave Desert. Two travelers find more than scorching sun and endless sand. Something with twisted faces and ravenous intent lurks in the shadows of abandoned military roads, an encounter that begins as a curious detour and transforms into a desperate fight for survival. I still can't wrap my head around what we went through near the Mojave Desert. My cousin Willow and I had been planning a road trip through some lesser-known corners of California, mostly because we're big fans of weird roadside attractions and abandoned places. We'd heard about the old mining towns scattered around Interstate 15, near places like Calico Ghost Town, but we wanted something less touristy, somewhere we could poke around without crowds. It was after chatting with a local mechanic near Barstow that we got the idea to check out these remote desert roads heading toward Death Valley, specifically an area near a forgotten military testing site that no one seemed keen on talking about. He mentioned that people sometimes saw flickers of light in the distance at night, but he shrugged it off as old munitions or strange local legends. That didn't faze us, so we stocked up on water and snacks, and off we went. It's hard to describe that sense of isolation you get once you go off the main highway. The desert stretches out in all directions, and it can feel like you're the last people on Earth. We were halfway between Afton Canyon and some random dusty junction when we realized we were running low on gas, which was dumb on our part, but we assumed we'd stumble on a station sooner or later. By the time we noticed we were basically driving on fumes, the sun was setting. We spotted an old service road that branched off from the main route, and it looked like there might be structures in the distance. So we figured we'd turn off and see if maybe we could find help or at least a place to park safely for the night. We drove along that dirt path under a moonlit sky, each bump making Willow more anxious. The structures we saw turned out to be mostly decrepit sheds or abandoned shacks. The wind was picking up a bit, whipping sand across our headlights. That's when I noticed footprints along the edge of the road, bare human footprints in the desert, which gave me an uneasy feeling, especially because they looked fresh. We tried to ignore it, telling ourselves maybe it was a hiker or a prospector, though that was unlikely given the time of day and how remote it was. We finally gave in and stopped near this rickety shack that had a collapsed roof. We climbed out, flashlights in hand, to see if there was anything salvageable or if maybe someone was inside. The door was missing, just a twisted frame. Inside, we found some old cans, a broken cot, and bones. Animal bones, I told myself. It was better to think they were animal, though the shape made me uneasy. Willow was just about ready to go back to the car when we heard the first scuttling sound from outside, like somebody scraping across the sand. It was faint, but unmistakable. We peeked around the corner and saw movement out by some boulders maybe 30 yards away. The flashlight beam caught a shape that darted backward, out of sight, faster than anyone should be able to move. That was the moment my hair stood on end because it felt like we weren't alone, and it wasn't just one person. There was a sense that multiple eyes were on us. We rushed back to the car, realized our tank was practically empty, and decided to lock ourselves inside for the night, hoping daybreak would offer some clarity. Sometime after midnight, we woke to tapping on the windshield. I refused to turn on the headlights. I was too terrified. Instead, we just sat in the darkness, listening. Then the tapping got louder, and Willow quietly turned the key just enough to power the interior lights. In that dim glow, we saw a face peering in through the driver's side window. Calling it a face might be generous. This individual's skin was blotchy, almost raw, and you could see a strange, tumor-like growth above one eyebrow. The eyes were set too wide, almost as though they'd migrated further apart. I had this awful sensation that we were looking at someone who'd been exposed to radiation or some extreme chemical. The figure just stared at us, mouth slightly open, and we could see dirty teeth, filed or chipped into jagged points. Right about then, we heard another noise outside Willow's window. We turned our heads to see a second figure. This one had an elongated neck, and part of its arm looked shriveled, like it hadn't developed properly. It held a rusted metal rod in the good hand, tapping on the glass. There was a hungry or predatory look in its eyes, if you can call that expression something that a human face could manage. We were both trembling. Suddenly, the first one, the wide-eyed one, disappeared from the window, and we heard rummaging noises near the trunk. That's when we realized there might be more of them out there. We had no choice but to hope they wouldn't break the windows and drag us out. The whole car smelled like sweat and fear. We made a plan. At first light, try to push the car as far as it would go, or maybe find a way to siphon leftover gas from any old vehicles near the shacks. But in the middle of these frantic thoughts, we heard what sounded like a guttural moan from behind the car. That's when the third one came into view, if you can even call it that. This one was squat but built solid, with lumps all along its spine, visible through torn clothing. Its face seemed partially melted on one side, with teeth permanently exposed where the cheek should have been. It was carrying what looked like a piece of rotten meat in its hand, raising it to its mouth in a slow, horrifying motion. We realized in that moment these might be scavengers, possibly cannibalistic. I felt nauseated. It was like being caught in a nightmare. The three of them circled around the vehicle for hours, occasionally disappearing behind boulders or crates, then popping up at the edges of the windows. We tried not to make noise. The tension was unbearable. At one point, the wide-eyed individual crawled onto the hood, pressing its face against the windshield. I caught a glimpse of filth-encrusted fingernails scratching the glass. Willow fought the urge to scream, covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. I remember thinking we might not survive till morning. Eventually, daybreak came. The sky lightened, and in that hazy early dawn, we saw them scatter like cockroaches, slipping back behind the rocks. Before we mustered the courage to move, we heard distant shouts. To our shock, it sounded like more of them, deeper in the desert. We debated whether to try to drive further or risk leaving on foot to find help. Our car sputtered for about half a mile before giving out completely. We found ourselves stranded on foot, scanning the dusty horizon for any sign of a road or a ranch or anything that resembled safety. It was nearly an hour later, parched and exhausted, that we saw an old pickup truck bouncing along a worn path. We flagged it down. The driver was an older man who looked bewildered at our condition. We tried to explain about the mutated people, the ones that practically hunted us during the night. He muttered something about a rumored off-limits area from military testing decades ago, hinting that you hear stories of families squatting in old bunkers, suffering genetic damage from radiation. He didn't want to hang around, so he gave us a lift back to Barstow, dropping us off at a gas station and telling us to stay away from those restricted areas if we valued our lives. I've told a few others about it, but most chalk it up to delirium or some elaborate hoax. However, I can't forget the image of that face pressed against the windshield, the lumps on that squat figure's spine, or the reek of decay in the night air. My cousin won't even speak about it anymore. She just avoids the subject entirely. I'm sharing this account because I genuinely think people need to know that there are places in our deserts where you could stumble upon unspeakable horrors, things that might once have been human but now barely resemble it. Those old nuclear or chemical test sites have a dark legacy. No matter how many times they're declared safe, things can lurk out there, maybe half dead, half insane, definitely dangerous. If anyone's planning to go off the beaten path in the Mojave or near any other forgotten desert wasteland in Southern California, don't assume you're alone, and don't assume everything out there is just harmless wildlife. In the quiet of dawn, the desert reveals its secrets, or buries them beneath shifting sands. For those unlucky enough to see what lurks in the midnight gloom, the question remains, just what is waiting out there, eager to greet the next unwary visitor? And so, another strange encounter fades away. A trick of the mind, or something far more unsettling. That's for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching my stories. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support is what keeps this channel going.